The world didn't end with a bomb. It ended with a breath. No one heard sirens. No missiles crossed the sky. No cities turned to ash. When they realized what was happening, people simply collapsed where they stood, in the streets, in their homes, at their workplaces. Within hours, an entire nation ceased to exist. But the forests remained green. The rivers still flowed. Animals grazed peacefully in fields where silence had replaced the sounds of human life. The perfect weapon. And the beginning of the end of humanity. The planet was already living on the edge. Every news channel, every government briefing, every late-night conversation carried the same underlying fear. World War III was no longer a question of if, but when. Yet everyone understood the unspoken truth. Nuclear weapons meant mutually assured destruction. If one fell, they all would. The entire world would burn. So nations circled each other like wolves, teeth bared but never quite striking. Until someone found a way to kill without destroying everything else. China had done what seemed impossible. In underground laboratories hidden from satellite surveillance, their scientists had engineered a biological weapon transmitted through the air itself. It could distinguish human DNA from every other living thing on Earth. Breathe it in, and within minutes, your lungs would collapse. Your heart would stop. Your brain would shut down. No pain. No warning. Just silence. And the terrifying beauty of it. The world would remain untouched. Buildings intact. Ecosystems thriving. Resources ready for harvest. All that would be missing were the people. To test their creation, China manufactured a border dispute with Argentina. The accusations were thin, the provocations obvious to anyone paying attention. But the world had grown numb to such theater. The United States monitored the situation from a distance, satellites tracking troop movements, intelligence agencies filing reports that would sit unread on desks in Washington. No one expected what came next. No one could have imagined that humanity had just created the means of its own extinction. The weapon worked flawlessly. In 72 hours, 99.9% of Argentina's population was dead. Buenos Aires, once vibrant with tango music and bustling cafes, became a ghost city. Mar del Plata's beaches lay empty under the sun. The streets of Córdoba filled with abandoned cars, their drivers gone before they could even pull over. Families sat frozen at dinner tables. Children lay in playgrounds. The weapon had moved through the population like an invisible wave, and when it receded, only corpses remained. But the cities stood perfectly preserved. The Andes Mountains still reached toward the sky. Jaguars prowled the forests. Whales breached in the Atlantic waters. Nature hadn't noticed that humans had vanished, and that's when the planet understood. The rules had changed. The old deterrents no longer applied. Nuclear weapons kept the peace because they destroyed everything. This weapon destroyed only the enemy. The world's response was immediate and predictable. Panic. Smaller nations began surrendering to Chinese demands before any demands were even made. Trade agreements were signed overnight. Resources were promised. Territories were quietly ceded. The global economy bent itself into a new shape, with Beijing at its center. Every country calculated the same terrible math. Better to submit than to die. Every country except one. The United States refused to kneel. Behind closed doors in Pentagon bunkers, American scientists studied every piece of intelligence they could gather. They analyzed atmospheric samples. They interrogated defectors. They worked backward from the effects, molecule by molecule, until they understood the weapon's structure. And then they did something that would seal humanity's fate. They recreated it. But they didn't stop there. In a move that would be debated by historians for generations, if there were any generations left, the U.S. shared the weapon with its allies. The message was clear. If China could erase a nation, so could they. To prove they had achieved parity, to demonstrate that the balance of power still existed, the United States chose a target. Vietnam fell in 48 hours. The rice paddies grew wild. The bustling streets of Hanoi went silent. Ha Long Bay's limestone karsts rose from empty waters. Another nation deleted from existence while the world held its breath. The planet froze in collective horror. This wasn't war. It was something worse. War had rules, even unspoken ones. Soldiers fought soldiers. Civilians tried to survive. But this was extinction as strategy. And now everyone understood the endgame. This conflict wouldn't end with treaties or negotiations. It would end when one side ran out of people to kill. The superpowers had created a weapon so efficient, so clean, so perfectly lethal, that the only logical conclusion was mutual annihilation, unless someone found a way to stop it. While governments prepared for the unthinkable, while military strategists drew up lists of cities to sacrifice and populations to save, a young Argentine scientist living in the United States made a breakthrough that no one thought possible. She found the antidote. Dr. Carolina Vega had been one of the lucky few, or perhaps unlucky, depending on perspective, who had left Argentina months before the attack. She was conducting research at a university lab in Massachusetts when her entire family, her friends, everyone she had ever known, died in a single afternoon. The guilt nearly destroyed her. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, locked herself in the lab for days at a time. Her colleagues worried she was having a breakdown. They didn't realize she was waging a war of her own, working from fragments of intelligence, from leaked data, from her own brilliant intuition. She reverse-engineered the weapon's mechanism, and once she understood how it killed, she found a way to stop it. The antidote was elegant in its simplicity, a modification to human cell receptors that made the weapon unable to bind. One injection, and the bioweapon became harmless. The person could walk through contaminated air and breathe freely. They could survive in a dead city. They could live when everyone else would die. The moment she confirmed her results, Dr. Vega made a fatal mistake. She told her supervisor. She thought she was saving the world. She didn't realize she was painting a target on her back. The news leaked within hours. It moved through intelligence networks like electricity through wire. CIA, FSB, MSS. Every agency on Earth suddenly knew. The weapon could be stopped. And that changed everything. If the antidote existed, attacking the United States and its allies no longer guaranteed victory. They could inoculate their populations. They could walk into contaminated zones and reclaim them. The weapon that was supposed to end the war had just become obsolete. The balance of power shifted again, but in a direction no one had anticipated. Dr. Vega understood before anyone told her. She saw it in the way security personnel suddenly appeared outside her lab, in the way her calls went to voicemail, in the way her supervisor avoided eye contact. She had created something more valuable than any weapon, the ability to survive anyone's weapon. And now she was the most wanted person on Earth. That night, as armed guards patrolled the hallways outside, she had a realization that would change everything. If the antidote stayed in American hands, if it became the property of a single government, humanity would still be hostage. The U.S. would have the power to decide who lived and who died. They could inoculate allies and leave enemies vulnerable. The weapon might belong to many nations now, but the cure would belong to only one. And that was just another form of tyranny. She decided she would rather die than let that happen. Dr. Vega had one advantage no one knew about. Another Argentine scientist, a close friend named Lucia, who had also survived. They had been colleagues in Buenos Aires, had fled to the U.S., together, had mourned together. And remarkably, strikingly, they looked almost identical. Same height, same build, same dark hair and brown eyes. Strangers often mistook them for sisters. It was a coincidence that would save the world. The plan formed quickly, desperately. They would switch identities, change their appearances just enough. One would stay and play the role of the trapped scientist, buying time. The other would run, not to hide, but to reach Switzerland, where a neutral coalition of scientists waited. There, protected by international law and Swiss neutrality, the antidote could be mass-produced and distributed freely to every nation on Earth. No one would hold the power of life and death. Everyone would have the cure. The weapon would truly become obsolete. But getting to Switzerland meant crossing an ocean, avoiding two superpowers who would kill to possess her, and surviving in a world where trust had become extinct. They had no official help, no military escort, no diplomatic protection. Just each other and a single vial of the antidote that represented humanity's last hope. The escape began at dawn. Disguised as homeless women, wearing dirty clothes and pushing shopping carts filled with trash, they walked out of the facility in plain sight. Security was looking for a scientist trying to flee. They weren't looking for two invisible women whom society had trained itself not to see. It was the perfect disguise. Poverty as camouflage. They moved through cities on foot, sleeping in shelters, eating at soup kitchens. Days blurred into exhaustion and fear. Every police car that passed could be their end. Every stranger's glance could be recognition. They traveled south toward ports, toward ships that crossed the Atlantic. And slowly, carefully, they made their way toward an escape that seemed more impossible with each passing mile. But they weren't alone. Both governments had deployed their best agents. The CIA knew Dr. Vega would run. Chinese intelligence knew she was the key to ending American dominance. Both sides used satellite surveillance, facial recognition, informant networks. The hunt was global and merciless. Then came the decision that would haunt one of them forever. They realized the Chinese were closing in faster than expected. Two women traveling together were easier to track than one. And there was only one prepared dose of the antidote. The rest of the formula existed only in Dr. Vega's mind and in encrypted files she carried. If anything happened to her, if she was captured or killed, humanity's hope died with her. They stood in an abandoned warehouse arguing in whispers. Lucia insisted she take the antidote and run. Carolina refused, saying it was her discovery, her responsibility. They went in circles until Carolina played her final card. You're the only person on Earth I trust completely. If I die, you're the only one who can recreate my work. You have to survive. That's not optional. Lucia took the injection with tears streaming down her face. Then Carolina spoke the words that would seal her fate. I'm going back to Argentina. It was insane, suicidal. The country was still contaminated, the air still deadly, but it was also the perfect proof. If she could survive there, if she could walk through those dead cities and breathe that poisoned air and live, it would be undeniable evidence that the antidote worked. No government could claim it was fake. No scientist could dispute it. She would be living validation. And from Argentina's coast, she could catch a cargo ship to Europe. The ports were empty now, unguarded. Ships still came to collect resources from a nation that no longer needed them. It was dangerous, but possible, if she survived. They switched everything. Identification, clothes, appearances. Lucia cut Carolina's hair shorter. Carolina gave Lucia her glasses. They practiced each other's mannerisms, each other's voices. When they were done, even they had trouble telling who was who. Then they split up, heading in opposite directions, each carrying the weight of human survival on her shoulders. Carolina made it to Argentina in 6 days. The journey was a blur of smugglers' boats and bribes and terror. But when she finally set foot on contaminated soil, when she breathed that air and felt her heart keep beating, she knew it had worked. The antidote was real. She was immune. She was proof. She spent 3 days walking through Buenos Aires, documenting everything, taking samples, recording video, building an irrefutable case. The city was a tomb, but she was alive in it. She found a working satellite phone in an abandoned electronics store and sent encrypted messages to contacts in Europe. The Swiss scientist confirmed receipt. A ship would arrive in 5 days at Mar del Plata's port, be there, and she would be safe. She made it to the port on schedule. The cargo ship sat in the harbor, Russian flagged, bound for Rotterdam. Freedom was 200 meters away. She started walking toward the dock. That's when they arrived. The first group came from the north. American Special Forces in tactical gear, breathing masks covering their faces. They moved with military precision, weapons raised. Then the second group appeared from the south. Chinese operatives, similarly equipped, similarly armed. They had tracked her to the same place at the same time, and now they stood in a dead city, pointing guns at each other and at her. The firefight was brief and brutal. Soldiers fell on both sides. The contaminated air didn't matter to the dead. When the smoke cleared, only 2 men remained standing, an American team leader and a Chinese commander, and between them, Dr. Carolina Vega, unarmed and exhausted. "The antidote," the American demanded. "Give it to us now." "You'll come with us," the Chinese commander said, his English perfect. "You've done enough damage." Carolina laughed, and the sound was hollow. "I'm sorry to disappoint you both, but there is no antidote to give you. The only dose that existed, I already took." She gestured at herself, standing in the poisoned air of a dead nation, breathing freely. The proof stood before them, alive and untouchable. The Chinese commander stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It was the coldest expression she had ever seen. "That's all I needed to confirm," he said quietly. He raised his weapon and shot her 3 times in the chest. She collapsed, blood spreading across the concrete. The American started to raise his gun, but the Chinese commander was already speaking, his voice almost conversational as he bled from a wound in his side. "You people are so predictable. You really think we would create a weapon like this without creating the antidote first?" The American's eyes widened behind his mask. "We've had the cure for months. We just needed to know if you had independently developed one. And thanks to her," he gestured at Carolina's body, "now we know you did. Which means this war is about to get very interesting." The American shot him before he finished the sentence. The Chinese commander fell beside Carolina, both of them bleeding out on the dock of a dead city. The American ran to Carolina, dropped to his knees beside her. "Stay with me. We can get you help. The antidote. Where's the formula? We need—" She grabbed his hand with strength that shouldn't have been possible. Blood bubbled at her lips when she spoke. "We won," she whispered. Then she died. The American knelt there for a long time, holding the hand of a woman he didn't know, who had tried to save the world and seemingly failed. Eventually he stood, called for extraction, and reported what happened. The body would be recovered, analyzed, honored, probably, in some classified ceremony that the public would never know about. But there was something the American didn't know, something the Chinese didn't know, something that no one except 2 women would ever know. The woman who died on that dock wasn't Dr. Carolina Vega. 2 months later, in a laboratory in Geneva, a scientist with dark hair and brown eyes delivered the antidote formula to the international coalition. She provided documentation. She answered every question. She oversaw the production of the first 1,000,000 doses. She watched as shipments left for every continent, every nation, every population center on Earth. The weapon that had killed billions suddenly became impotent. Humanity, against all odds, had survived. No one asked her name. She had entered Switzerland on refugee documents, one of millions displaced by the war. She could have been anyone, and perhaps that's what saved her. In trying to possess the cure, in fighting over who would control it, the superpowers had let it slip through their fingers entirely. It belonged to no one now. It belonged to everyone. Lucia, the real Dr. Carolina Vega, worked for 6 more months in Geneva. Then, one morning, she simply didn't show up. Her apartment was empty. Her documents were gone. Security footage showed her leaving in the night, a small bag over her shoulder, walking into the darkness and disappearing. Some said she went back to try to reclaim Argentina. Others believed she started over somewhere remote, somewhere no one would ever find her. A few conspiracy theorists claimed she was assassinated, that some government had finally figured out the truth. But most people assumed she had just wanted to be anonymous again, to be free of the weight of having saved the world. The world never knew her real name. History books would later credit an anonymous scientist with creating the antidote. Statues were erected to the unknown savior, but her face was never carved in stone. Her story was never told in full, and maybe that's exactly what she wanted. Sometimes the world isn't saved by armies or governments or people whose names echo through history. Sometimes it's saved by someone who decides not to belong to any side at all, someone who looks at the powerful people fighting over the future and quietly chooses to give that future back to everyone else. Someone who understood that the greatest act of heroism isn't standing in the spotlight. It's stepping into the shadows so that everyone else can live in the light.
So, that's the end of this story, but there are plenty of other great ones right here. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that little bell.